Hello, and welcome to this deep dive.
Hello?
You know, it feels like all anyone is talking about lately is the UK general election results.
Understandably so.
So we thought it would be really valuable to unpack what happened and maybe more importantly, what it all means.
Absolutely. There's a lot to dig into.
We're drawing on some great analysis that first popped up on the Westferry Times podcast.
Yes, I remember our discussion there.
And to help us navigate all this, we have the very insightful Dr. James Thornton, political analyst and academic, who, as you heard, shared his expertise over on Westferry Times. Great to have you with us again in this format.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
Okay, let's dive right into the headlines then, because they were certainly attention-grabbing.
They really were.
Labour secured a majority with 352 seats. I mean, that's a really significant win.
A very strong result for them, yes.
Meanwhile, the Conservatives faced what's being called a historic loss, ending up with just 154 seats.
Quite a dramatic shift in fortunes.
And we also saw the Liberal Democrats surge to 48 seats, while the SNP's representation decreased.
Right, shifts across the board, really.
So thinking back to when those results first started coming in, what was your immediate reaction? What struck you most as you shared on Westferry Times?
Well, it was a fascinating mix, really. A combination of shock and inevitability, perhaps.
How do you mean? Shock and inevitability.
Well, a Labor victory had been, widely predicted for some time. So that wasn't the shock.
Okay.
But the scale of it, that was staggering. And the depth of the Conservative defeat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's historic.
Their worst in decades, I read.
Yes, certainly their worst defeat in decades.
Yeah.
It signals, as we talked about on Westferry Times, a very, very clear desire from voters for a fundamental shift.
Not just swapping leaders, then.
No, not at all. It feels much broader. A desire for a different tone, maybe a different vision, and definitely a need to rebuild trust.
Absolutely. And something else that caught my eye was the voter turnout, just over 68%.
That's quite high, relatively speaking.
It is, isn't it? Suggests people were pretty engaged. What can we sort of infer from that turnout figure?
Well, linking it back, that level of participation suggests that, despite maybe some cynicism around politics recently,
Yeah, there's been a bit of that.
a lot of people really believe their vote would count this time. They felt they had something to say.
A message to send.
Exactly. They were motivated to get out there and make sure their voices were heard.
So let's try and dissect that message a bit, especially for the Conservatives. Their losses, as we said, were huge, including those red wall areas, places that, flipped to the Tories last time.
Right, areas they'd only recently won over.
What do you pinpoint as the main reasons for that big swing back?
Well, it seems like several things really came together. As we analyzed on Westferry Times, there was that long period of internal instability.
The 3 prime ministers in one term?
Exactly. That sort of thing definitely erodes public confidence in, stable governance.
Sure.
Then you layer on top the various scandals that damage trust further.
Right.
And crucially, I think, a widespread feeling that the government just hadn't really got a grip on the cost of living crisis.
Which affected so many people.
Absolutely. It led to a really significant drop in voter faith, I believe.
It was interesting, too, wasn't it, that they lost ground not just in those traditional swing seats, but also in more suburban areas and places with lots of younger voters.
Yes, that's a key point. What's really fascinating is that clear demographic shift in voting patterns.
Younger voters turning out.
Very much so. Younger voters seemed particularly keen on change, actively voting against the status quo, you could say.
And it wasn't just the tight races.
No, that's the thing. The losses weren't just confined to those marginal battlegrounds. They actually lost seats that were considered, historically safe conservative territory.
Wow. That's extraordinary, really.
It shows the real breadth and depth of the electoral setback for them.
And then there's the Reform UK factor, nearly 12% of the national vote.
A significant share, even if it didn't translate into many seats.
Right. They didn't win much outright, but how did their presence impact the Conservatives?
Well, even without winning many seats themselves, their impact was pretty significant, I'd argue.
How so?
They essentially split the right-wing vote in many places.
Ah, okay.
And that proved particularly damaging for Tory candidates in those tight races, those marginal constituencies.
So disaffected Conservative voters went to Reform instead.
It seems a considerable number did, yes. Voters on the right who weren't happy with the Conservatives opted for Reform, which just chipped away at the Tory vote in crucial areas.
Okay, let's pivot now to Labour's side of the story. A remarkable journey, really.
Ready to turn around.
From that, well, crushing defeat back in 2019
Yes, a very low point for the party.
to securing this strong majority under Keir Starmer. What were the key elements of the strategy behind that?
Well, over the last 4 years, Starmer's focus has been very deliberate. A sustained effort to, as people often say, detoxify the labor brand.
Detoxify.
Meaning projecting an image of discipline and, crucially, competence. Qualities maybe some voters felt were missing before.
Right, rebuilding that basic trust.
Exactly. He strategically aimed for the middle ground, appealing to those centrist voters.
And the campaign itself felt quite safe.
It did. The messaging emphasized being a safe pair of hands, reliable, stable. It wasn't really a radical campaign pushing for massive shifts.
And geographically, Labor made big gains, winning back parts of the North and Midlands, the Red Wall.
Yes, reclaiming those traditional heartlands was key.
But it wasn't just there, was it?
No, precisely. Their success wasn't limited to just winning back those areas. They also made pretty significant inroads into southern England.
Which suggests...
It suggests a much broader base of support across different regions. They managed to build a more diverse, geographically spread coalition of voters this time.
There is some debate, though, isn't there, about whether this was really a pro-Labor vote or more of an anti-Tory vote.
That's a really important question, yes. And there's definitely truth in the argument that many voters were primarily motivated by wanting the Conservatives out.
So, less enthusiasm for Labor, more rejection of the Tories.
It's possible that politics played a big part. However, politics is often about momentum.
And Labor certainly has that now.
Undeniably, they captured that momentum. So while we can debate the depth of positive pro-labor feeling, their ability to capitalize on that widespread desire for change was absolutely crucial to their victory.
Okay, let's shift focus again slightly. What about the other parties? The Liberal Democrats had a pretty good night.
They did, yes. Notable performance. Up to 48 seats.
What was the key to their gains, do you think?
Well, what's interesting is how effectively they targeted their campaign. This is their best result, seat-wise, since 2010.
Right.
And it seems largely down to appealing to voters who were disillusioned with the Conservatives. Yeah. Particularly in the Southwest.
Yes, traditional Lib Dem territory in some ways.
And also in those commuter belt areas around cities. Ed Davey's leadership and their very focused local messaging seemed to resonate there.
Okay. On the flip side, the SNP saw their numbers go down, now 27 seats.
A definite decline for them, yes.
What factors contributed to that shift in Scotland?
It looks like a few things are interconnected. Some internal issues and leadership changes within the SNP probably played a part. But also, Labour's resurgence in Scotland is significant. It gave voters who might have backed the SNP before a viable alternative.
And the independence question.
Well, it seems that while independence is still obviously very important to many SNP supporters, maybe it doesn't hold quite the same immediate urgency for the broader electorate as it perhaps once did. Other issues might be taking priority.
And briefly, the Green Party doubled their MPs from 1 to 2.
Yes, still small numbers, of course.
But is there significance there?
Absolutely. Symbolically, it's important, and their vote share is growing, especially among younger people.
Right.
It strongly suggests that environmental issues are becoming a primary motivator for a growing segment of the electorate. It could signal a longer-term trend.
So, looking ahead now, Keir Starmer heads to Downing Street. What are the immediate challenges facing his new government?
Well, the biggest one, perhaps, is managing expectations.
Yes. Always tricky.
Very. After such a decisive win, voters will be looking for tangible results. They'll want progress on big issues like housing, inflation, the NHS.
And they'll want it fast.
And they'll likely want to see it relatively quickly, yes. The pressure will be on.
Now, given Starmer's sort of cautious approach during the campaign, should we expect big, radical reforms straight away?
Based on that campaign and his general political style, he's usually seen as more of a cautious reformer.
So no immediate fireworks.
I wouldn't necessarily expect that, no. The initial focus is more likely to be on, demonstrating competence, stability, gradual, steady change rather than dramatic shifts.
What about foreign policy, specifically Brexit and the EU relationship?
Labour will probably look to build closer ties with the EU. Areas like trade, security cooperation.
But not rejoining.
Oh, I think rejoining remains politically very sensitive. A full reversal of Brexit seems highly unlikely, certainly in the near term.
Maybe smoother trade deals then.
Yes, attempts to negotiate smoother trade terms, perhaps closer alignment in certain sectors. That seems more probable.
And for the conservatives, after such a massive defeat, what does this mean for them?
Well, it could well mean a potentially long spell in opposition.
A long exile.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It strongly suggests they need a period of pretty fundamental reassessment, a kind of complete reset.
New leader, new ideas.
Exactly. New leadership, developing fresh policies that resonate more broadly. But, British politics is often cyclical.
True. They'll be planning their comeback.
Undoubtedly. They'll be looking for ways to rebuild and return eventually. It's rarely permanent.
Okay, we got some great questions from listeners via the Westferry Times social media after your chat there. Shall we tackle a couple?
Sure, let's see.
First one is from @Lydian_Leeds. She asks, will Labour reverse Brexit arrangements?
Right. Well, as we were just saying, a dramatic reversal seems highly improbable.
Too difficult politically.
Very. But exploring ways to get a closer trading relationship, that's definitely possible. But a full U-turn is unlikely.
Okay. Next, @Ben South London wants to know, what happens to Rishi Sunak now?
Well, after a defeat like this, the historical precedent is pretty clear.
Resignation as party leader.
It's highly probable he'll resign as Conservative leader quite soon, yes.
Yeah.
That would then trigger a leadership contest within the party.
To decide who leads them in opposition.
Exactly.
And one more for now from @GreenFuture now. Will climate policy be a priority for the new government?
Labor has certainly talked a lot about green investment and tackling climate change, so yes, it should be a priority.
But any caveats?
Well, the exact level of ambition and how quickly they move might be shaped by the economic situation they inherit.
Reality bites, perhaps?
Economic realities and other pressing domestic issues might temper how much they can do, especially early on, but it will definitely be on the agenda.
So, as we sort of wrap up this deep dive, what's your final takeaway, your overarching assessment of this election's significance?
I think ultimately this election marks a really significant reset in British politics.
A reset.
Yes. Voters have clearly, strongly demanded change. The big challenge now for the incoming Labour government is actually delivering on those high expectations.
Across quite a few difficult areas.
Across a whole range of complex policy areas, yes. That's the hard part.
And what should we as observers be watching most closely in, say, the first 100 days or so?
I'd keep a close eye on their first budget decisions that will signal priorities.
Okay.
Any major policy moves on the NHS and housing, obviously, and also just how unified the Labour Party appears.
Internal unity.
Yes. The honeymoon period for any new government doesn't last forever. The pressures of governing can start to show cracks if they're there.
Dr. James Thornton, thank you so much again for sharing your analysis, building on that great discussion from the Westferry Times podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And to you, our listener, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the UK general election results. As you think about everything we've discussed, maybe consider that inherent tension every new government faces. That gap between the public's hunger for immediate big change and the often messy, slow reality of actually governing.
It's a constant balancing act.
It really is. What specific policy areas do you think will be the biggest tests, the biggest indicators of success or maybe failure for this new government as it gets started? Something to mull over. And a final thank you to our colleagues at the Westferry Times podcast. Their reporting and analysis really provided the foundation for our conversation today. For this deep dive, I'm Emily Carter. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.